Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our third Summer 2020 Virtual Executive Speaker event. My name is Dr. Nicole Coppell, and I'm the MBA Director, and I'm thrilled to be inviting you here to our Virtual Speaker Series. This has become a highlight of our COVID summer. Given the continuing limitations in the global pandemic, we're excited that through this series, we're still able to hear from senior executives whose stories and advice are so invaluable. In addition to MBA and other School of Business students, we want to welcome prospective students, alumni, faculty, staff, representatives from the school's advisory board, and members of the Feliciano Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation Meetup community, all to our audience. The format of this evening session will be an interview-style presentation facilitated by our Feliciano School of Business Dean, Dr. Kimberly Hollister, with their featured speaker, Matt Jahansouz, Chief People Officer at WeWork. The session will culminate with a brief audience Q&A session facilitated by. Thank you to everyone who provided questions for Matt in advance. But at this time, we are happy to invite you to enter additional questions using the Q&A feature found on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll do our best to have Matt answer as many of the questions as time permits. This presentation has been a team effort on behalf of the MBA and graduate program staff, Dean's Office, and the FBUS technical team. And I want to thank everyone for their contributions. At this point, I have the honor of introducing my colleague, Professor Jeff Monticelli, who's been the maestro of the Executive Speaker Series program, who has been orchestrating all of the details. Professor Monticelli will be introducing our featured guest.
Thank you, Nicole. So tonight, as you know, Dean Hollister is going to interview Matt Jahansouz. And for those of you who missed the announcement of Dean Hollister, in June, she assumed the reins from Dean Kant. And interestingly enough, for those of you who didn't know, worked her way up from professor all the way through to be the dean of our School of Business now. Matt graduated from Penn State nearly 20 years ago with a degree in finance and has held positions in 3 really prestigious companies, in Deloitte Consulting for 7 years, and ended up running their human capital consulting practice, and then in Goldman Sachs became the managing director and the global head of recruiting, and for 9 years. And now for WeWork is the Chief People Officer and the Global Head of Talent. So since I'm the only one not muted, so for the 100+ of us on the line, I wanted to say thank you and welcome. So.
Great. Matt, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And to kick it off, our students and our audience always love to hear the journey of our guests. And so I'm hoping that you could start and tell us a little bit about your journey from your finance degree that Jeff mentioned at Penn State through Goldman Sachs and in your current role as Chief People Officer for WeWork.
Sure. First, thanks for having me and spending the next 60 minutes. Looking forward to having a good conversation, and always a nice part of my day when I get to spend time with all of you here at Montclair State. So my story is a little bit of a zigzag. Have kind of ended up in roles and gone to companies that didn't necessarily think I'd be at, and just took one opportunity after another rather than trying to project where it was that I wanted to be. I grew up all across the United States. Was born in Utah, lived in Louisiana, Kansas, Pennsylvania. After going to Penn State, moved to New York to start my career. Thought I'd do 2 years and then kind of get out of the big city and go live a much more calm life. But almost 20 years later, still here. So I studied finance at school, like you mentioned. I thought that would be the path that I'd, kind of more logically follow in terms of, doing banking or corporate finance or something, directly within, the business area that I studied. As I was starting to think about different opportunities coming out of college, I did, something that I've, continued to do throughout my career, which was reach out to other people who were, maybe a couple of years, ahead of me or who had gone through different experiences and ask for their perspective, and ultimately got connected with, an old friend who had graduated a few years ahead of me, that he himself had a consulting experience. And he's like, I'm telling you, I think you would love it. These are the different experiences that I've had. And here's, a couple of different companies that I'd look at. And so, Deloitte recruited on campus at Penn State. So I, went through their, interview process, and, whenever they kind of had their second rounds on site, pretty quickly thought, I was surrounded by people that I'd want to work with. It felt like a company and a culture that I thought I could, grow up at, or at least start my career at. And the work as I understood it, but at that point in your career, you don't really quite know what you're getting yourself into, sounded interesting, enough, and felt like it built on, at least some of what I had done and learned at school. And so I joined Deloitte. At that point, it was probably less programmatic and structured than, a lot of company programs today, where you kind of know exactly what you're going to do and what program you're going to be a part of. And I think it was maybe a month before I started, I got a letter saying I was going to be in their human capital consulting practice. And so, I quickly pinged some people to understand what human capital consulting meant. Figured out it was essentially, HR consulting. So everything from, compensation and benefits and recruiting and performance management, and other elements of, kind of running, a people and culture organization. So moved to the city, did that for, 7 or 8 years, had an extraordinary experience, would highly recommend consulting to anyone. Whether you do it for 2 years or 10 years or 20, you build a skill set that I think is tough to come by in other, industries. It's very problem solving based. It's, interacting with, clients who are trying to work through challenges that they themselves can't work through. You get exposure to a number of different industries. You're constantly on the road. And so, there's a level of excitement and energy that comes with it. So had a great career there, and got to a point where I thought, all right, I can either stay here for probably the next couple of chapters, or maybe it's time to just go do something different. And so, moved out of consulting and went into corporate HR. Thought if I was going to do that somewhere, I'd want to do it in an organization that, valued people and had a storied, history and culture. And so Goldman Sachs made sense to me at that time. And, over my nearly decade there, played a number of different roles. Again, leveraged my consulting background, which made me a little bit more of a utility player, kind of a rangy athlete that could hop around and do a lot of different things versus maybe a deep, subject matter expert in any one part of HR. And so that allowed me to maybe get exposure to more, parts of the end-to-end function than, some folks who maybe typically grow up, in the function from the start of their career. So, ultimately got to run recruiting and talent management and a couple of other parts of the HR business. And, again, kind of got to a point where I thought, I could either, run out the next half decade or so at Goldman and probably continue to take on more responsibility. But it felt like a fairly predictable path. And so I was ready to do something, different. Little did I know that I'd get myself into something that was very different. And so, ended up getting connected to some people at WeWork, really took my time getting to know the organization, realized it was a huge shift from what I had been doing in terms of, a much more corporate, 150-year-old bank that really kind of took process and every other element of running a business pretty seriously. And thought, a pre-IPO, hyper growth, kind of build it as you go type experience would, round me out, having had, consulting and finance, and now, something that I think a lot of people want, which is more of that startup experience. So I've been at WeWork for about 18 months. I've seen a lot in that period of time. What it is or what it's becoming is, definitively different than what I originally, thought that I was signing up for. That said, it's been, extraordinarily rewarding, fulfilling, on many days exhausting. But I remain as optimistic now as I've ever been about, our business and our future. And quite frankly, I think some of the challenges that we've had, have forced us to get a lot more focused and thoughtful about, how we actually run, a smart business. So anyway, it's been a good and, as I said, unpredictable set of experiences that I've had so far.
Great. Thank you for that backstory and what you've been through. So in touching on what you said, since you've been at WeWork for 18 months, and some people are, when they talk about WeWork or what their perception of WeWork is either providing office space for entrepreneurs and enterprise employees rather than office culture as a service. And so, how would you really describe what WeWork's providing in the business model there?
It's a great question. There was certainly, a time in the history of the company where I thought it was, maybe a bit more bold to say that it was selling culture. I don't actually think that's true. I think culture is something that's, very specific and unique to any given organization. I don't think you can buy it. I think it's a living organism that changes every day, based on all of the different things happening within an organization. That said, there are core elements of a culture, that include, the people, leadership, technology, tools, and space. So I do think it's a important, contributing factor to culture. I think the way that, an environment is set up and whether it, fosters and forces collaboration, whether it kind of breaks down walls, whether it's something that's high energy and is inspiring, can drive a much more positive culture and set of experiences, be a tool to retain, to recruit and ultimately retain, a different type of talent that has an expectation that's maybe a little bit different than what, the workforce of 10 or 20 years ago looked like. So I do think we provide that, as a component of helping to, strengthen, or differentiate a culture. Where we are now, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, the global pandemic and its impact on, real estate and, our business in particular. We also provide, something that's, I think, becoming increasingly valuable, flexibility. And, what most companies have had to do historically is, if you want a headquarter in New York City, you need to go sign a 20 or 30-year lease for, maybe a 10,000 person, corporate HQ. How much are you going to grow? Are you potentially going to shrink? Are you ultimately going to need to distribute your workforce? In today's environment, how many people are going in the future, how many people are expecting to be there 5 days a week? What we offer is a space solution to that issue that says, if you're a small company that's going to scale up quickly, or, in the current environment, many corporations are downsizing, how do you have some flexibility in what's one of your most significant fixed costs, which is, real estate. And so to the extent that we can help people, solve that issue, and think through, not only, where do I put my people, but how can I, change that as my business changes, is a big part of what WeWork is doing. And so flexibility is definitively at the very center of our strategy and, our core offering right now. And that's where we're seeing some of the most interesting conversations take place as folks try and project what, kind of the future of work looks like, in a post-COVID environment.
Yeah, really interesting. And you touched on a little bit about where we are with the global pandemic, and it's hard, even in this conversation, we should be sitting on a stage together, right in front of real people, having this conversation as opposed to in our living rooms. But so what do you see the impacts of coronavirus on your business model, and do you see that as temporary, as long term?
It's a good question. We're evaluating it on a daily basis, right? There was a point in March where I think we all thought we were going home for 2 or 3 weeks and, would return to normal. Little did we know that was not the case. right now I think people are still continuing to try and, at least put some kind of timeline around, what is happening. And hopefully, at some point we'll have a better sense. It feels like we're getting, maybe not closer to the end of this, but closer to, the point in which we know maybe when the end will come. That said, there is no post-COVID environments, even whenever I say that, sometimes I am reluctant to do so. But, in terms of its impact to our business, on an immediate basis, when the majority of people, across the U.S., across the world are working from home, that certainly has a direct impact in terms of our occupancy and foot traffic in our building. But, whenever we think about, kind of the go forward, to the point that I made where, someone's going to be less likely to take that 10,000 person, 20-year lease, HQ, but they're still going to need to put their people somewhere. We become, a much more likely solution. If someone doesn't need space for all of their people 5 days a week, they only need it 3 days a week, again, we're there. As a lot of companies are thinking through, I only have one location in New York City to get my people to, but what if I had three, one that's downtown, one that's in Brooklyn, and one that's in Midtown, so that different folks can go to the one that's most convenient for them, in a world where, the number one, concern that in most cases people will cite as kind of hesitation to return to work is, public transportation and navigating that in large urban areas. This idea of a hub and spoke model seems to, resonate with, enterprise clients. So we actually think, somewhere in here there might be a bit of a tailwind that helps us. Again, it's a matter of, weathering the storm. We've had to think, very hard and make significant changes to our actual space. So, your typical space that pre-COVID could fit 1,000 people, now fits somewhere between 500 and 550. And that's generally a rule now across, most commercial real estate, because you have to de-densify and, create room for social distancing. A conference room that used to sit 10 people now maybe sits 4 to 5. So, as you do that, again, people's need for space. So even if, a company's saying, I'm not going to bring back, my entire workforce of 1,000 people, I'm going to bring back 750, they're still short on space, even though they have the exact same HQ where they used to fit, more people than that in. And so, again, we become a potential solution for that. But those efforts to de-densify, we have a fleet of 800 offices around the world. We had to go through and do that to all of our spaces. So how do you spread things out? How do you take chairs out of the room? How do you create sanitation sessions? How do you introduce temperature checks? How do you distribute masks? How do you enforce, different safety and health procedures? So it's been, complex to say the least. There's no playbook for what's going on. And when you sell office space and you have 800 buildings around the world, you try your best to figure it out.
Really interesting, and also sometimes some of the same challenges that you're facing when you're talking about going around office buildings, we're facing it across so many different industries right now. So even before coronavirus, you mentioned the future work, and obviously WeWork exists to some extent because of where we've seen work going. But are there any other trends or transformations that you see in the coming decade? Seems a long time, 5 years. Sure.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I do think this what we're going through right now, is effectively, the largest work from home experiment in the history of the world, right? And people used to, pontificate and, throw out, views on, remote work and, the impact of productivity and collaboration on, work from home. And all of that's been tested, and certain things that were thought to be true, have proven to be, entirely wrong. And, to me, it was a little bit of a validation exercise that sometimes we try to predict the future and come to realize, at some point the future will become the present. You'll realize exactly, how far you were from the truth. But I do think we can't underestimate the impact of, this kind of remote work, virtual work, companies taking the view that they're going to allow that forever. From my perspective, it's feels a little early to make, that kind of a decision. I do think there's, a really, really important part of, the work experience of, learning and development that comes through, face-to-face interaction and being together. So I do think that has a potential negative consequence if it's, taken too far out. I think working from home in many cases is a privilege of the wealthy. And I say that in the sense that there's, a lot of people right now who, don't have, internet or don't have the space or don't have the tools. And so what's the impact of that, from a socioeconomic perspective? So anyway, we're going through that now. So, is that the future or is that the present? We'll see. But I think there's downstream implications that we're not fully, weighing out. Putting that to the side, there continues to be a significant amount of, discussion around, the impact of, the gig economy or freelancers or people who are electing not to go work for, a large corporate, but, essentially be their own boss. And, kind of be a contractor to different organizations and have a whole host of different experiences. That's been spoken about for probably the last, half decade. The numbers would suggest that that's a trend that, has been realized and is likely to continue. I certainly see it in my business and from, a workforce recruitment perspective. So, in a world where, now you used to have, I don't know, 10,000 people working at a company, all 10,000 were employees, and now, maybe 70-30 are employees versus contractors. What's the impact of that on, the product, on innovation, on culture? It could potentially be a very good thing because there's an injection of, new blood, new ideas, and folks who are moving around. You could argue the other side. I think in the same way that we've seen, maybe to move on to a different topic, of the future of work, people have, been quick to emphasize, basically what happened in the last, call it early 2000s, that shifted towards engineers, coders, programmers, like that kind of just snuck up on everyone as the, largest component of, or one of the largest components of the global workforce. I think there's an idea of like, what's the next kind of major, job category that we're not fully, seeing right now. And when does that start to hit? There's different views as to what that will be. I think folks continue to think that, technology, engineering, kind of that type of mindset and set of experiences won't go away. But, again, thinking through what else might come, I think there's, a real sense that you've got to be, sometimes right now to continue to grow in your career or take on larger roles, you've got to be a little bit more of the athlete versus, previously people would kind of, have a very successful career growing up in a single vertical. And so having different experiences from, an industry perspective or global perspective are important. So, I think, all of those, we'll kind of see how that plays out. But I think, it reminds us as we're kind of investing in ourselves and, our careers, to, stay up to date on what's happening in the market and what are the necessary skills, continue to, prioritize your own learning and make sure, whatever the next big thing is, you've at least got a view and ability to contribute to it.
Exactly. Which is great. And I want to come back in after one of the questions about some of your advice for career guidance. But one of the issues you mentioned in your last answer was you sort of mentioned some of the equity issues of, who's fortunate enough to be able to, to work from home. And, so in addition to facing, of course, the pandemic, we're facing really pivotal questions on how to address social justice issues, equity issues. And, how is WeWork addressing some of these challenges, or how have you seen other companies addressing some of them?
Sure. It's a great question. It's an important one. Sadly, we continue to find ourselves having, the same conversation of, inequality and, discrimination and, social injustice that should have ended, decades, if not generations ago. But I think it's a reminder that, it is something that is happening today. Sadly, there's a reasonable probability it'll continue to happen. And so you do need to ask yourself that question of, how do you think about it? How do you bring it into work? I'd say historically, maybe there was a view of, that's kind of a separate topic, maybe you touch on it, lightly and quickly and move on. And, I think over the past decade, half decade, maybe more so, that started to shift. I'd say this time around, it feels like it has more teeth and, greater longevity than before. And I think people are willing to take a stronger stance. I think even, 4 or 5 years ago, there was a real hesitation across, corporate America to even, reference, let alone, stand, next to, the Black Lives movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. And so to now essentially see every company, take that view and start to make, serious investments and changes to their business and their strategy as a result of it, again, indicates that we are moving in the right direction. So, at WeWork, it's something that we take seriously. We have thousands of employees, spread around the world and, many thousand in the United States. And as, the, events of the last couple of months, really started to take place, our employees are going to be the first ones to, ask us what is our point of view as a company? What are we doing, inside of our four walls and more importantly, perhaps outside of them? We were very quick to, make an external statement. And, our view was we didn't just want to make a statement. We wanted it to have some kind of action associated with it, so on kind of the first set of efforts that we took, we granted $2 million towards Black-owned businesses and, made a number of other, commitments in the future as we think about, internal and external contributions we could make. One of the first things I did, I deeply believe that, to make progress, you've got to understand, first, what are the actual issues. To understand, you often have to, stop and, listen and, learn and have a dialogue about different people's experiences. So we hosted, dozens of, roundtable conversations with folks across, the organization to really just ask the question of, how are you doing in the context of everything that's going on and what can we as an organization do to help and support our people. So, I think the conversation is happening in a way that you just haven't seen before. And so I find that encouraging. But again, I think people want to see action. I think the conversation used to be, a little bit more about diversity and, how can we increase diverse representation? That, of course, remains, a priority for our company and many others. I think language and strategy is shifting towards, a really heavy focus on inclusion as well. And recognition that inclusion has to precede diversity. If you try and inject diversity into an organization that's not inclusive, the likelihood is it actually won't work. And so we're taking a number of different steps to try and become, more welcoming, more inclusive, allow people to truly be their authentic selves and feel as if they can, show up, the same way at work as they would, outside of it. But then you've also got to get pretty serious in terms of, analyzing and looking at data, creating real structure and governance, making sure leadership is accountable, and then going across every different aspect of the business and thinking about how do we recruit talent, how do we develop talent, how do we support our employees, how do we make sure our managers are prepared for the realities of being one in kind of, this day and age. So programmatically, you're looking at, introducing and investing in a lot of different initiatives. So it's not easy, super complex topic. There's no silver bullet. But, I think, thinking about it in a very human way and trying to, take it from a place of, understanding and empathy to, action is vital to really doing something meaningful.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate that, your perspective. And, and we're fortunate at Montclair State to be coming from our students are in, we're an extremely diverse university. a majority minority institution at this point, and so hearing from the outside perspective and trying to help our students to understand how they can navigate. And so the segue into the next question, do you have advice for students in terms of looking at planning their careers? I mean, you mentioned before about being athletic, and maybe you could expand on that and some other thoughts you have.
Sure. There's a lot of different ways to, be successful, whatever that means. And I think, recognizing that there's a wide definition to that versus thinking there's kind of only one way. I've got to have a certain title, or I've got to, earn a certain amount of money. I think is a surefire way of, being disappointed, but maybe more importantly, being, unfulfilled. So I think, think expansively about what it is that you want to do. I'm a big believer in, collecting as many experiences as possible, and knowing that if you do that, they'll just be a better chance that new opportunities and new doors will open for you. You're really smart and talented. Guess what? There's a lot of other really smart and talented people. But if you have a bunch of different, interesting, hard, complex, experiences under your belt, and you don't have to have succeeded through all of them. Sometimes actually failing is just as important. If you bring that to the table, when I'm talking to someone, I want to understand what are the things that they've done, what have they seen. Did they just kind of exist in a one-dimensional world, or have they explored something from multiple angles? So, collect as many different experiences as you can, and then, when you find yourself in a little bit of a rut, or you've been doing the same thing for a while, and sometimes that feels comfortable and safe, kind of recognize and acknowledge that you're in that moment, and start to find a way out of it. So I think that's important. Use your network, build a network, know that it takes time. Not all of us are naturally inclined to go out and, meet people and talk to people and, present ourselves and what we've done and who we are and the value that we can add. But you got to get comfortable with it. You got to work on it. You got to write it down. You got to rehearse it. You got to say it. Anytime you go out and interview, I think we'd all agree, the first time you interview, you're like, I don't know that I really did that well. The second or third one, you're like, all right, I kind of figured that out. It felt like that worked. That didn't. By like the sixth interview, you're like, I got this down. I know how to relay my story. And so if you have your story down, and then baked in a bunch of different experiences, and you've built a network with folks who can help you understand different opportunities, in certain cases open different doors, or connect you to different people. I think that sets you up for success. But maybe the last piece of advice I'd share is don't. Sometimes we can get caught up in the same way of like, let me define success in a very finite way. Let me say, like, where am I trying to get to in 10 years or in 20 years? I think that's an impossible task, and quite frankly, I think it's a little bit of a foolish one, because who knows what the future is going to bring. And so if you think sometimes in 2 or 3 year increments, it makes it a little bit easier. And if it's all right, what am I doing today, and where do I want to be in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe on the high end. I think it becomes a little bit easier to make decisions and not get overwhelmed by is this the right thing or is that the wrong thing? Because over the course of a career which could last 30 to 40 years, there's going to be some left turns and some things you maybe wish you hadn't done, and that's okay. But back to like recognize it then and get yourself out of it, and also chalk it up to what you just had an experience, and that's a good thing. So anyway, I could talk about different advice or failures or learnings I've had, but that's a couple that quickly come to mind.
Perfect. Along with so stacking those experiences, what is your view on students collecting digital badges or stackable credentials, other than those jobs and things that they've had?
I think, look, I'm a believer, anything that you can do to, differentiate yourself, add to the experiences that you've had, highlight to others, who you are, what you've done, and, the skills that you bring to the table are, those are all good things. So I would never discourage anyone. I don't know that there's as much value and emphasis placed on some of those digital badges as those distributing those might suggest, or different articles would place on them. But again, I think it's less maybe about the actual badge and what's the experience or the skill that you built and that badge represents, and then can you relay that. So I think they're valuable. I wouldn't go crazy down a single path to collect as many as possible. I think it'll be interesting to see, is that a trend that does continue to grow? And if so, being ahead of the curve is always a good place to be. So I think it's worth pursuing. Probably wouldn't be the top priority for me right now. It's more about those actual experiences, and then just being able to talk about them.
Sure. And before we move to some of the other questions that some of our audience members must have, if you think back, what is the best career advice that you've ever gotten, or what would you advise yourself if you were starting back over again?
Oh, good question. Somewhere along the way, someone essentially said, chase the hard stuff. So maybe that's in line with kind of my idea of pursuing different experiences and getting as many as you can. I think a lot of people are quick to say yes to the projects that everybody would say yes to, or the jobs that everybody thinks are the great ones. I think it's the rare person who says yes to something that seems especially hard or complicated, or maybe even boring, but of significance. And so whenever I reflect upon my own career, and I think about what do I think was the most significant kind of moment or milestone that contributed to getting me to wherever I am. It was the hard stuff, and it was the things that probably at the beginning and maybe even during I didn't want to be doing. I wish they'd end. I wanted to go onto the sexy project in a great location whenever I was in consulting versus being on global outsourcing project sitting in a service center in Jacksonville for 2.5 years. But being the person who said yes to those when most people were saying no, and then succeeding at them, I think is a very quick way to differentiate yourself. And you also learn the most about yourself during those moments. Whenever you are questioning, is this what I want to be doing? But despite it all, you wake up, you work hard, and you perform, and you deliver. I think sometimes when you want to say no, you should don't be so quick to do that. Give it a little bit more thought and think, is there something to be learned? Is there maybe more of an opportunity to this than you might see? And doesn't mean say yes to everything. You've got to have some kind of filter. But sometimes, if you look to your left and your right and everyone's kind of passing by an opportunity, dig a little bit deeper, because that could be the one that actually sets you up for success that you might not see.
Great advice for our students, and I think things that they can really grow on. So I want to ask Betsy. I know she's been monitoring some questions that have come in from the audience, and to see what she has to say. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. We've actually got several questions here for you, Matt, and one of them picks up nicely from the discussion you just had about your challenges. And the question is, what was your biggest leadership challenge in moving from an established mega firm like Goldman Sachs to a very entrepreneurial kind of new age firm like WeWork?
It's a great question. It was really hard. Really hard. I remember being shocked, quite frankly, at just how different. I knew the cultures were different. I knew the companies were different. I knew where they were and their life cycles were different. I mean, that was obvious. But when you've gone from something that's so structured and corporate to something that's so unstructured and still thinks it's a 200-person startup when it wasn't. The entrepreneurial spirit, the energy, the bias for action, the sense of kind of grow at all costs was both exhilarating and a little terrifying. Because I had come from a world where I didn't necessarily love all of the structure and the data and the consensus associated with Goldman, but I certainly think those are really important ingredients into what makes them such a unbelievably successful firm. So I wondered with those things missing, what was the likelihood that a company like this could succeed? And honestly, I think the lack of some of those things contributed to some of the challenges that we had a year ago as a company. So I think being eyes wide open to the fact that it was very different. And trying to just learn and adapt and not, kind of go to the natural mode that a lot of new joiners will do of like, well, we did it this way at my place, or, I'm used to, and kind of just lean into it and accept it. Find a couple of people pretty quickly that I could trust, look for a couple of people who had other similar experiences. Oh, that person came from a big company and now they've been here for a year. Let me ask them, kind of learn, what are the sacred cows? What are the things that, you want to avoid? And so again, I'll always try and, connect with other people and, learn through their experiences to accelerate my own understanding of something. But it was definitely one of the more challenging transition points. But upon reflection, or maybe 18 months later, I'd say this, I think the chances of me going back to something that corporate are very, very low. I took a little bit of a bet on would I enjoy this kind of environment as much as I thought I might, and the answer ended up being yes. So I was fortunate, but it was definitely an interesting first couple of weeks.
I'm sure it was. And I believe that not long after you got there, you had a reduction in force that was something like 20% of your workforce, which is incredible. But one of the questions that we got was, how have your hiring practices changed or picked up, in the last few months? And do you see those changes extending, into the post-COVID era?
Sure. Was it specifically about hiring practices? Is that what
Hiring practices of WeWork. So have you needed to hire? I mean, even as you've had to downsize, have you needed to hire? And are you looking for different sorts of people? Is that something that you see will continue?
So I'll say this, as I've mentioned a couple of times, I've been there 18 months. When I joined the company in January or February of 2019, we were 9,000 people. At peak in September of last year, we were 15,000 people. So we, didn't quite double, but, grew by a significant percentage in a very short period of time. Most companies that see that kind of growth in, a half decade. We're preparing to go to 20,000 in 2020. Obviously, the IPO failed and we ran into the challenges that we had to. Went into, a significant, restructuring and downsizing that kind of really had two chapters, one in the fall of last year and, one that, wrapped up earlier this year. And now we're, roughly a 6,000 person company. So I've seen, a lot of hiring and, sadly a lot of downsizing, but, unnecessary exercise to make sure that, we could actually run a successful long-term business. But, as we think about hiring practices, it is, I think going to be really, really important as we kind of, turn, the page and think about a new future. And, what were the best aspects of, the people that we hired that allowed this company to be successful? Maybe what are some of the attributes that we wouldn't want as we, thought about, running the business differently in the future? We rethought, our culture, given some of the challenges that we had. We rewrote our values, which very quickly then, shift into, all right, well, what are the competencies and characteristics and behaviors that I'm going to hire for. And, again, some stayed the same and some changed. You're looking for a slightly different profile, at this point, now, it's maybe less about kind of the, young, energetic, like grow at all cost mindset. And now it's, a little bit more of like a structured, kind of business minded, turnarounds. I think turnaround is harder than hyper growth. So, it's looking for folks, sometimes again, when you're kind of just growing rapidly, you'll hire the kind of hungry, I'll do whatever you want person. And then you realize, having, someone with a bit of experience and having seen and done it before and knows your industry and expertise, it becomes more valuable. So, the way in which we hire continues to be, similar. We want folks to get to know our culture, get to know our business, meet as many people across as many different functions as possible. So there's definitely parts that we're trying to, carry forward, but, a lot has changed in that period of time that I've been there.
Yeah, I'm sure. And another question related to hiring and hiring again in this time of COVID, which is what factors would stand out to you particularly if you were interviewing or when you are interviewing a candidate virtually?
It's a great question. It is a little bizarre, right? You're bringing people into an organization and they never met, any of your people. They didn't step into your workspace. You didn't get to really kind of share a moment together, beyond, being on a computer. So, I think that said, you're still looking for some of the same, qualities. Are they going to be, happy in the culture and work environment that you have? Do they bring the right set of, experiences and skill set and mindset, to the table? What are the reasons why they're looking to join? What are the reasons why they're looking to leave their current journey? We just brought in, a senior person, and we were interviewing him for a while, really over the course of the summer, trying to recruit him, and he just started this week, and so we called up yesterday, and he was, highlighting how as he was going through the process, because it was virtual, he felt the need to spend even more time than he typically would and meet more people, because you got to kind of break through this, virtual world we're all living in to make sure that what's on the other side of the computer is kind of real, or as real as you think it is. I said, I think that's exactly right. So I think someone who's, going to be eager to try and get as much information as possible and really understand, kind of the way that the organization works. Because the reality is, when you do go interview somewhere and, you're there for 3 hours, you see how different people interact, you see who's coming and going, you see there are a lot of people in the room. Like you get cues that I think are important, and give you a signal as to whether that's going to be a place where you want to be a part of, and you strip all of that away, and we've all got our whatever rooms we're sitting in behind us. I think that fabric of what makes a lot of organizations unique or special kind of gets hidden, and so you got to dig a little bit deeper to find it. And I think it's important to see candidates who know that and are willing to do it.
Right. That's very true. I have a question here that's picking up on something you said just a minute ago, which is you mentioned that the company has in a way changed its values, WeWork. And the question is, did the company change its values because it was losing so much money, or that the original value system was flawed and needed to be revised?
Definitively the latter. I think your culture and your values ultimately affect everything, including your success, your profitability. But I don't know that values alone are going to positively or negatively affect your cash outflow. But if your culture is broken, over the long haul, it's going to be difficult to be successful. But we the reality is, so we just 2 months ago, my CEO and I spent 3 months working on, our values and talking to a lot of different people and employees and leaders. And, the first place we went to was our, older original values. And the more that we read them, the more that we thought, many of them, not all of them, needed to be carried forward. And so, to our employees, when they read our new values, they'll see a fair bit of, our historical, kind of priorities, baked into it. But then we thought there were new things that had to be said. Our very first value is do the right thing. That wasn't there in the beginning. And we think that's incredibly important. We do think there was an element of that maybe was missing and got us to where we were. And if we focus on that, every single day and every employee lives it, it's going to be tough not to be successful. So anyway, it was ultimately a balance of old and new, of who we were that made us special, letting go of the things that we think didn't, and then, rethinking, who do we aspire to become, and how do we make these aspirational?
Great. And again, talking about your values, you mentioned before, you talked before about inclusion. A question here is, are there efforts, a specific question about that, are there efforts to hire people with disabilities?
There are. So,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Nope.
No, definitively. I always try to think about, defining diversity as broadly as possible. There's kind of your maybe more traditional definitions. There's ones that I think companies are continuing to focus more and more on, and then there's kind of also just folks who have different backgrounds and experiences and perspectives, and so you want that. But yes, I think increasingly you're seeing a lot of companies be very thoughtful about recruiting and retaining diverse individuals or individuals with disabilities. So it's an area that we're just starting to focus on, across the, all categories or dimensions of diversity. In some areas you tend to do naturally well based on, the demographics of the workforce that you bring in, and in other areas you need to be, much more deliberate and thoughtful. And so that is an area that we're focused on.
That's great. That's great. And another fairly specific question is, what is the advantage WeWork brings to their clients compared to big companies such as CBRE or Cushman & Wakefield, the sort of more traditional names in real estate?
It's a good question. I think there's a little bit more of kind of that inspirational design that translates to a work environment, a culture that I think is more relevant or tuned into kind of today's workforce and generational needs or expectations. Otherwise said, I think there's a lot more energy and a better product that you'd find at our organization versus a competitor. We have a fleet, that's globally spread in a way that's tough for pretty much any of our competitors to go to. So again, 800 plus buildings in, 100 plus cities in 40 countries. So our global scale is a big differentiator. And probably our willingness to be, a bit more flexible as we think about, leases and how we bring folks in, and then kind of the different offerings or plug-in products that we have versus other organizations. So we think we have something that's different and better and cheaper than what other organizations are providing clients. But it's time will tell.
Time will tell. And so we have time for one more question, and this just came in. And it says, is WeWork a profitable company? And if not, when would you expect to be profitable?
Great question. We just had an earnings call earlier today. Maybe that's one of our analysts calling. We're not today. We existed in this world that a lot of companies existed in for the last decade, which was, growth at all costs, run your revenue as high as you can and don't worry about the bottom line. It'll come a lot, later. And quite frankly, every organization that did that, whether it's, I won't name names, but, WeWork included, took a little bit of the, we all kind of pitched the Amazon story, right? They weren't profitable for more than 20 years. And look, so long as, and some people will say, it was the wrong strategy. The world is, the reality is, the world chose to invest in those companies more so than actually someone who showed a path to profitability. And so when you're seeking, capital, and that's actually the question that they're asking, which is how quickly can you grow, how much can you scale, and there's not even a focus of at what point are you going to turn to profitability. Guess what? That's how most of your startups are going to run. Now I think based on what we saw in the market last year, we were a major contributor to it, but certainly not the only one. The world kind of stopped and said, hold on, profitability does matter, or at least a path to profitability. And so that's where we've been focused. I mean, we spent most of December and January laying out our path to profitability. We defined a 1, 3, and 5 year financial plan. Our executive chairman came out a couple of weeks ago and said that publicly our intention is to become profitable in the back half of 2021, which would be pretty extraordinary considering we're a company that a year ago was losing about $4 billion. And so, we think we're on that path, and quite frankly, if we do that for as much as we've been beaten up in the media, I think, they'll call this one of the better comeback stories, if not, the best one. I'm pretty optimistic that's going to happen. So we're on our way.
That's great. Well, we look forward to having you back in 2021 to talk about that.
Perfect.
And if you're any indication, Matt, I think they're very lucky, and we should all be optimistic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and it was really good to be here, and hopefully this was useful to everyone on the line. So thank you for having me as always. Great to be with you.
You're welcome. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Coppell now, and she'll say our good nights.
Yes, I'd like to very genuinely say thank you. This has been an incredible experience, Matt, just listening to you speak about what your accomplishments are, the insights on the future of work for all of us. I mean, particularly in this current environment, and the path forward for finding opportunities that WeWork is going to be doing. We're really, it was very useful and well appreciated that you were here this evening. And of course, the invaluable career advice you provided for all of us and for our students to really use and to help them move forward, because, as you could probably imagine, a lot of people are facing all different types of challenges. So again, I can't thank you enough tonight, but I also want to talk about moving forward. Is there a slide that we wanted to show some of our upcoming, yes, save the date, thank you. To show some of our upcoming virtual executive speakers, because this has been really an amazing series that we've done, started this summer in light of COVID and not being able to be together in a large auditorium as we were used to. And we've really gotten a lot of attention with this. So we're very excited for that. And we're going to continue this as a virtual speaker series into the fall. And we have two very exciting speakers coming up. The first one will be on Monday, September 21st, where we'll be welcoming Chuck Muth, who's the Chief Growth Officer for Beyond Meat, which, as you guys all know, has been on an amazing trajectory of growth. And then on Tuesday, October 20th, we have Carla Harris, I'm ready to say Kamala Harris, but Vice President and Managing Director at Morgan Stanley. So we have some exciting events coming up. So please mark your calendars, save the date, and we look forward to seeing you at those events as well. And once again, thank you, Dean Hollister, for facilitating this, and for Associate Dean Rossini for helping with the Q&A session. And then, of course, Matt, once again, thank you for your time and effort and for being here for our students. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much. Take care. Thanks again.